All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Harvard Law School Library Book Talk on Imperfect Oracle, What AI Can and Can't Do by Cass Sunstein. You can get a print copy of this book as well as his other recent book, Algorithmic Harm, Protecting People in the Age of Artificial Intelligence, from the Harvard Coop. You can check it out from the library, or there's a desk right out front where you can get your own. We'd like to thank Dean Goldberg's office for their generous support of the Faculty Book Talk series, as well as our fantastic team here, Teresa Knapp, Debbie Ginsburg, Lisa Ryden, Mindy Kent, Jess Rios, Ari Scordas, Catherine Bondo, and Christine Park for their assistance, and also Emily Ryder-Neal there for being the architect of this event. Before we get started, please make sure that you've silenced any devices that might make noise. We are joined today by Cass Sunstein. Cass Sunstein is the Robert Walmsley Professor of Law here at Harvard Law School, where he is also the founder and director of the program on behavioral economics and public policy. He teaches courses on administrative law, behavioral economics, and the Supreme Court, and has advised officials at the UN, the European Commission, the World Bank, and many nations on the issues of law and public policy. I will now happily turn it over to Professor Sunstein for discussion, and there will be time for a question and answer towards the end. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, everybody. It's thrilling to see you here. Thanks for being here. We have a small topic, which is AI and the law, and the topic is so large and so wide that the only way to make progress, I suggest, is to take a slice, and AI is allowing us to advance our slides. And here's the slice. Everyone in this room is biased and noisy. By biased, I mean to say that there are cognitive biases built into the human mind. This isn't about racism or sexism. This is about cognition. And by noisy, I mean that our judgments at 10 a.m. on Wednesday might not be the same as our judgments at 7 p.m. on Friday. There's variability. AI can be unbiased in the cognitive sense and noise-free, and so more accurate with respect to predictions, and that's really fun. Even more fun, AI-powered algorithms can identify biases that people have that people don't even know about yet. And again, this is about cognitive biases. The second thesis is that algorithms will fail in the sense that there are some things, notwithstanding their freedom from cognitive biases and their noiselessness, there are some things that they just can't predict. So if I'm about to flip a coin, no one in this room can predict accurately whether it's going to be heads or tails, and AI can't make accurate predictions either. I asked a large language model if it could make an accurate prediction about my coin flip, and it said no. And I asked why, and it said because it's random. Now, that's not the right answer. It's not random. It's deterministic. It's just that there isn't enough data available. So I said to AI, it's not random really, is it? And AI responded to me, you're right, it's not AI, it's deterministic, but I don't have the data. And I asked it, what data would you like to have? And it said, well, I don't know what you're going to do with your thumb. I don't know how high it's going to go. I don't know the air pressure. I don't know anything about the surface. I lack data. So in that very simple example is a problem of the absence of data, even in principle, and that leads to a failure of predictions. Algorithms and AI generally might not be able to foresee the effect of social interactions, which can lead in all sorts of unanticipated directions. Think what got you to this room, which involves what got you to the city in which you find yourself, which involves what things happened at certain stages of your life that got you here. Social interactions are very plausibly part of the answer, and those are very hard to anticipate. I can say a conversation I had with my best friend at the age of 11 was a sine qua non of my getting to be lucky enough to be the author of this book. And if that conversation hadn't happened, no way. And it wasn't a particularly dramatic conversation. If you want to hear more details, I will tell you. But without it, no such book. People's preferences are often invisible to the world. So everyone on the planet has a desire or a belief that hardly anyone else knows about, and that creates big problems. So the algorithmic failure, or the AI failure generally, is a replication in important ways of what is occasionally called the socialist calculation debate, where Hayek, the greatest critic of socialism ever, urged that planners can't come up with market prices, not because they're dumb and not because they lack the right motives, but because they don't have the right information. Markets have a lot of information in them about what you like, how the products are working, how much resources you have. Markets have a lot more knowledge than planners can have. Hayek's critique of planners was a little like the large language model's self-critique with respect to its ability to say how a coin toss is going to turn out. And Hayek, often not loved on the left, ought to be admired, if for nothing else than this insight. And his career-long odyssey was a generalization of his claims about why socialist planners can't work. Okay, algorithms might not be able to anticipate sudden or unanticipated leaps or shocks, like a technological breakthrough, a pandemic, or what's sometimes called a black swan. Algorithms might lack local knowledge or private information, which human beings might have. And algorithms with two asterisks, because it's really important, might not be able to foresee the effects of context, timing, serendipity, or mood. Think, for example, of why people fall in love or in like. They might not have fallen in love or in like if one of them had made a bad joke at the wrong time, or if one of them had worn a corduroy jacket, which the other particularly didn't like, or one had been in a slightly sour mood because something went wrong 2 hours before. It's very hard for AI to understand. Okay, with respect to the challenges algorithms face, and this is AI more broadly, there was a study in 2020 of whether algorithms could predict how families are going to be a few years hence. And all you need to know about the Fragile Families Challenge was that there was a lot of data about various families, a lot of data available, and then the world was challenged to take that data available and to make certain predictions about what families would look like a few years hence. So the question was, could you determine whether people are going to be laid off from their jobs, whether the household is going to encounter economic difficulty, whether the household is going to be evicted from its property, whether people are going to be engaging in job training because the economic situation's gotten bad. So the basic idea is, will machine learning methods with AI or algorithmic assistance be able to do super well in making predictions? And the basic outcome was that everybody did pretty badly. The algorithms were a little better than random. They weren't horrible, but they weren't a lot better than random. And for single event outcomes, like what would happen to this family, they were very close to random. So the basic claim of the researchers is that low predictive accuracy isn't because of the limits of any approach. It's just hundreds of researchers tried and they failed. So it's in the nature of the problem. So that's a little glimpse. Now we're going to go up a hill into celebration of AI's potential, and then we're going to go down the hill with cautionary notes about AI's limitations. So here's the upbeat, cheerful part of the remarks. The down the hill part has its own cheer, but it's a very different kind of cheer. Okay, suppose the question is highly relevant to lawyers, whether people who've been arrested for crime are going to flee the jurisdiction if they are given bail, or if they're going to commit a crime while they're on bail. In most jurisdictions, flight risk is highly relevant to the judgment of whether to give bail. In some jurisdictions, whether people are going to commit crime when they're out is the relevant question. Who's going to do better, human beings or algorithms powered by AI? It turns out that algorithms are much better. They're so much better that if you used algorithms rather than people, you could reduce crime rates very significantly and keep the same number of people in jail that are still in jail, that are now in jail. So jailed population stays the same, crime goes way down, or keep the crime level the same as it is now and have many fewer people in jail. You can make your pick. Or you can mix and match and make the the jail population go down significantly and crimes go down significantly. You can do both, but there are trade-offs and algorithms can help you get wherever you want to go. Question is, why do algorithms do better than human judges? There are two reasons that involve biases. And again, these are cognitive biases. The first is that the human judges overweight the current offense. So if someone comes in accused of shoplifting, the human judges are likely to say, shoplifting's not so bad, go home. The algorithm will say, well, it's a shoplifter, but what else is in the background? Maybe this is someone who's going to do something terrible, even though the current offense isn't awful. Or someone did something very bad. Let's say they engaged in assault. The judge is very reluctant to let that person go free. The algorithm might say, assault is bad, but look at this person's background. They never did anything. That's the only bad thing they ever did. They should get bail. That's one factor that helps explain the superiority of the algorithm. The other took a long time to discover, and it involved frequent engagements with the algorithm to get the algorithm to help the people, meaning the researchers, understand what was wrong with the people, meaning the judges. And here's what it is. The judges overweight the mugshot. Not about race, not about age, not about gender, about appearance. If people come in with a very messy face, the judges think, you probably should stay in prison. The algorithm doesn't give a lot of weight to the mugshot. Now, what's awesome, the technical term about what I've just described to you, is there are two cognitive biases which expert human judges are showing that were discovered in the 1970s. One is availability bias, where what's cognitively available drives probability judgments. So crime recently in my neighborhood, the probability of crime super high, I think. That might be a mistake. No crime in the neighborhood, I think probability is low. That might be a mistake. In this case, the current offense is cognitively available and driving probability judgments. The other cognitive bias discovered in the 1970s is representativeness. If someone is representative of a doctor, let's say, they look like a doctor, they're kind of dressed like a doctor, people will say they're probably a doctor. Now, the population of doctors is a very small subset of the population of persons, so people overweight what they're representative of, and so to the mugshot, to the human judges, is representativeness of criminality. If people are super messy in the face and look like they're not taking care of themselves, and that's given undue weight. The human judges are also noisy. If you go to Judge A, that judge might say, go free. You go to Judge B, that judge might say, stay in prison. Not only is there noise across judges, but there's noise within judges. So what a judge does might depend on whether it's Monday or instead Friday. Okay, for coronary events, we find what is spectacularly similar disparities. People go into a doctor, and the question is whether they should be tested for maybe having had a heart attack. Here, as in the judge's case, the algorithms outperform the doctors, like a lot. So if you relied on the algorithms rather than doctors, you could save a lot of money and have the same outcomes, just test fewer people. Or you could expend the same amount of money and have better medical outcomes because you're testing the people who should be tested. Now, of course, doctors are very good at this, as judges are very good at that. It's just that the algorithms are better. Why are the algorithms better for testing for coronary events? See if this seems like a rerun of the judge's data. If someone comes in saying, I have chest pains, and they've gotten really bad in the last 12 hours, doctors overweight that. The current symptoms, of course, should be given some weight. The doctors who are human give that excessive weight. Or if someone comes in who's an elderly, overweight man, the doctors will want to test. The algorithm will be more cautious about testing. If someone comes in as a young woman who doesn't look like a heart attack likely person, the doctors are more likely to say don't test. Now, emphasizing the current symptoms and the demographics, that's sensible. The only point is that the human beings overweight them, and note that we're rerunning the availability heuristic and representativeness. That's surreal, but it's exactly what we're observing, where a symptom of chest pains is cognitively suggestive of a coronary event, where the demographics are representativeness of a person who's likely to have had a heart problem. Doctors are also noisy, like judges. Okay, here's an interesting but from Harvard Law School. Crystal Yang, a professor here, has relatively recently found the bestest judges, the technical term, the 10% best judges outperform the algorithm. So 90% of the human judges are outperformed by the algorithm, 10% are better. We don't know exactly why that's relevant to the choice. It might be the 10% who are better just got lucky in the relevant period, like an astrologer who gets lucky for 2027. It might be that the judges have access to private information which is relevant because they actually see the defendant, and the algorithm doesn't have that. Okay, here's another interesting but. The algorithms are a lot better than the human judges and doctors, and in aggregate, they can produce great things. In individual cases, it's only a modest improvement. That's how prediction often is, modest improvements, which leads to LLMs versus AI-powered algorithms. So I think what we have to note is that AI-powered algorithms are matching inputs to outputs. Here's what you know about a patient. What do you think the patient has? Or here's what you know about a defendant. What do you think the likelihood of criminality is? There's something very powerful and rigorous about that kind of matching exercise. With LLMs, it's a different process where there's pattern matching and the probability that certain words follow other words. That's a vulgarization of what large language models do, but it's a first approximation. There might be cognitive biases in the training data that large language models have, as in the training data that AI-powered algorithms have. If you haven't turned the temperature down on large language models, and you may have noticed this, they can be noisy too. So large language models are potentially subject to biases and noise in ways that at least well-functioning AI-powered algorithms won't be, but large language models are getting better. Okay, now we're going to be more speculative. Coin flips we're going to take as the fruit fly experiment for the limitations of our imperfect oracles, where the key word is it's deterministic but not random, and the problem is not enough data. Here are three contexts from which I'm going to try to generalize where AI has been unsuccessful. First is with respect to romance. Second is with respect to the success of cultural products. And the third is about whether we're going to have revolutions. I've repeatedly asked large language models, can you predict revolutions? And the basic answer is typically, no, I have no clue. It will say a little bit more, either immediately or when pressed, but basically it says something similar to what it says about coin flips. And I want to draw from these three examples a broader lesson about where the oracle won't work. For romantic attraction, algorithms do really not well. We don't have any that is very good. That claim is a little complicated. We might know Mary just doesn't like bragging loud guys. And if you match Mary up with a bragging loud guy, he doesn't have a chance. But still, the predictive power is very limited. So the leading research finds, and this is kind of social science researchers getting a little poetic, that romantic attraction may be less like a chemical reaction with predictable elements than like an earthquake, good term here, such that the dynamic and chaos-like processes that cause its occurrence require a lot more scientific inquiry before prediction is realistic. Okay, what does that mean? It means an absence of data. It might mean that eventually we'll be able to say something pretty helpful about probabilities, maybe, but maybe not even that. If it's the case that what's meant by the dynamic and chaos-like processes is whether two people are going to hit it off depends on a bunch of things that happen on the spot and that can't be predicted ex ante. And those of you who have a partner or who are married, or preferably if you're married, you do have a partner, probably you recognize the level of randomness in what made everything work, which is not to diminish the power of how the random factors ended up working out in your favor. Okay, here's a study from a number of years ago that isn't about AI, but which is decisive about the predictive question for AI. It's a music lab experiment in which, it's called the Music Lab Experiment, in which there are a bunch of songs, dozens and dozens of songs, and people are visiting the website and hearing the songs, and you get a ranking in terms of what people like best and what they're downloading. So this part of the experiment is very conventional and uninteresting. So you have a song, Trapped in an Orange Peel, that's a real song. It turns out to do very well, people like it. Then you have another song called Gnaw, G-N-A-W, that's also a real song in the experiment. It doesn't do very well. So Trapped in Orange Peel is the winner, Gnaw is the loser. There's another song called I Am an Error, which is in the middle, and then you get a ranking. So in the control group, it's just as I described. The treatment groups, which are approximately 7, are like the control group with one exception. You can see in the treatment group how many people have downloaded songs in real time. You see the setup? So you can see in the treatment group, is I Am Error getting a lot of downloads? Or is Trapped in an Orange Peel getting a lot of downloads? And the question is, will all of the worlds turn out having something like the same ordering in the end? Because I Am Error is a terrible song, and Trapped in an Orange Peel is really great, and ultimately quality will out. Okay, so that's the question that's being tested. What emerges from the actual experiment is that the results in the social influence worlds, where you can see what's getting popular real time, are highly unpredictable. That songs can be spectacular successes in a world in which I Am Error gets early downloads, or terrible flops because in the first minutes, the song Nah turns out to be unpopular in the extreme. So the ordering you get in multiple worlds is highly variable and dependent on one factor, which is what songs are the beneficiaries of early downloads. Now, I can say that when President Obama was running, I was an advisor to the campaign in first round, and he was being crushed in the polls by Hillary Clinton. She was so far ahead of him, it looked doomed. And what he said to his advisors is, I'm running to be president of Iowa. I want to be president of Iowa. Help me be president of Iowa. Now, what he meant by that was he needed to win the Iowa primary. And if he won the Iowa primary, then anything could happen. And he had a powerful intuition, which is the same as in the Music Lab experiment, is that once you get the early download equivalent, then you might spurt to the top of the electoral heap, which is what happened for him. Okay, with respect to revolution, we have 3 challenges that make prediction very difficult. And they're different challenges from the challenges in the romantic case and in the music download case, but they are overlapping. The first reason revolution, and you can think of this as social movement, something more modest than a revolution, is so hard to predict, is you don't know what's really in people's heads. So if we're going to get some big movement in favor of, let's say, Donald Trump or Barack Obama, that might be, and it is in both cases, a big surprise to people on the ground. It's because what was in people's minds for the relevant actors was something that was not widely known. The extent to which people were enthusiastic about Obama and what he brought was not generally knowable because it was inside people's heads. And the same is emphatically true for President Trump. The second thing is whether to join a movement or to rebel depends on what your thresholds are. Your threshold might be, I will join a movement to do something if a bunch of other people do first. It might be an animal welfare movement, it might be some version of Make America Great Again, it might be some third thing, but you need to see a certain amount of support before you will join. How much support do you need? It's very hard to know, even if introspection doesn't tell us. If introspection doesn't tell us, then for observers, human or AI, to know is really, really difficult. So we don't know what are in people's heads. We also don't know their thresholds for action. Even if we knew both of those things, we wouldn't know the consequences or nature of social interactions. There was a paper written a few years ago by a Harvard political scientist with actually the assistance of the Chinese government on how the Chinese government deals with dissent online, on its social media. And what Professor King found was that if someone says something negative about the Chinese government at the relevant time in China, China doesn't put it down or punish the speaker. Typically what China does is flood the system with more positive messages as a way of signaling that the dissenter's view isn't widely held or isn't, the general view, which is smart because it is counteracting a potential perception that the dissent is widely held, which could fuel something. But, and it's a big but, if someone says on social media in China, I'm having a meeting on the street in this town at this time, there's going to be a big audience, please come, that will be treated more aggressively. And that's because that is more threatening. There's behavioral sense to that policy distinction, where the social interactions that might be fueled by the meeting would be equivalent to a lot of early downloads, and trapped in an orange peel might go to the top, where it's a descending movement. Can algorithms tell us something about probabilities? Maybe. Is the probability band going to be narrow or wide? Probably very wide, which isn't very useful information. Yeah, here's what John Maynard Keynes said about uncertainty, that with respect to some problems, we can't assign probabilities to events. There's no scientific basis on which to form any calculable probability, whatever. We simply do not know. So asking the price of copper and the rate of interest 20 years from now, or the obsolescence of a new invention, or the position of private wealth owners in decades, we simply do not know. That's like the coin flip made more socially relevant. Okay, here's a story for you. You probably know the story. You all know, don't you, that Connie Converse was the precursor to Bob Dylan and Joni Mitchell and Olivia Rodrigo and Taylor Swift. I'm sure you do. That Connie Converse was a 1950s singer-songwriter who pioneered basically songwriting of the sort that's now become defining and relevant. And when Taylor Swift and Olivia Rodrigo give credit to Connie Converse for starting the project that they've embarked on, that's kind of resonant because Connie Converse is known as the one who did it. I just kind of lied to you. Connie Converse was a real singer-songwriter, but she never got a break. She was on national television exactly once. She used to say that I have dozens of fans all over the world, which tells you a lot about her ironic, self-deprecating sensibility, which is also in her amazing songs. She would have been lost to history, Connie Converse would have, and it's thought, by the way, she disappeared at around the age of 50, just went off in her car. It's thought she killed herself. She would have disappeared to history, except that some of her recordings were captured not from anything other than basically in a home. She did this is what she did, that's why she had dozens of fans. And what she got from the home recordings was an appearance after her apparent death on a New York radio station for just a few minutes, as a result of which an NYU student thought, this is the most brilliant singer-songwriter I've ever heard. Who is this woman? He used his access to the person on the radio and his creativity in getting access to Connie Converse's brother to produce a little release of her songs, which went completely viral, which made her the subject of a superb and very popular book, which made her the subject of a major story in the New York Times, which made her trend toward the iconic status which I falsely described her as having in her lifetime. What the unpredictability of Connie Converse's ultimate posthumous triumph, and there are zillions of tales of that kind, is emblematic of is the difficulty of making predictions about a wide range of things, including people's success or failure in their lives. That's a liberating fact. That's the sense in which this second part of the talk about the imperfection of the oracle has a moral core and suggests that failure and success is often a result of serendipitous factors, which no algorithm can predict. John Rawls, kind of a large figure in law schools, emphasized that many things are morally arbitrary, including whether we are born into wealth or poverty, or born into a good educational opportunity or not, or encounter an 11-year-old, as I did, my best friend on the street at approximately 8:45 in the morning, producing a brief conversation that basically got me here. That's not a demographic thing. It's not about wealth, but it's a matter of moral irrelevance. And that suggests that there's a lot to be done to help those who didn't get the equivalent of early downloads. Okay, so experienced judges in the literal sense often do significantly worse than algorithms and AI. Current offense bias and mugshot bias, both discovered through the process of comparison. One mugshot bias completely unfamiliar and very surprising even to specialists. The fact that algorithms outperform doctors is a product of their lack of susceptibility to current symptom bias and demographic bias. So the 4 biases didn't even have names in advance of the relevant research. This is completely thrilling. Algorithms and AI can help not only to counteract human biases, to identify them. But there are some prediction problems on which algorithms and AI won't do well. This is a tribute to the intrinsic unpredictability of human affairs. Algorithms might not know what people prefer. They might not be able to foresee the effects of social interactions. They might not be able to anticipate breakthroughs or shocks. They might not have local knowledge about particulars, what's happening on the ground, and they might not be able to foresee the effects of context, timing, or mood. The real problem is that the relevant data aren't available to anyone, which means that accurate predictions just aren't possible. That has more than a little to do with freedom and moral obligations too. Thanks.
Thank you. We have about 10 minutes for questions, and we have 2 volunteers who are going to go back and forth on either side to bring this microphone to you. So we'll start here and go from there.
So something that this, to me, has a very clear implication for is sort of the question of whether superintelligence is even a thing that exists. I think in AI, people talk about it all the time. But I think the common thing that people think is oh, you just make a computer that can predict everything and it'll be great. I'm curious if you have thought about the integration of this idea and what are the limits of intelligence generally?
John Rawls, the philosopher who appeared on the slides, had a footnote in a manuscript he never published, which says, "We post a signpost, no deep thinking here, things are bad enough already." And that's kind of a guide for, I think, the largest questions, to go at a slice of the problem. So there are some prediction problems that can't be solved in principle, not by algorithms and not by human beings. There are some prediction problems that human beings do quite well at, and there are some prediction problems that AI can do better than people can. And these are some very useful categories to have. For prediction problems about whether the sun's going to come up, or whether if I drop an object it's going to fall, or whether if I click on the D on my laptop, D is going to show. Those are very simple ones, but human predictive judgment is basically unerring. For whether people are in need of testing for heart disease, doctors will do much better than lawyers, but less well than algorithms. And we know the reason, which is that doctors are susceptible to cognitive biases and they're also noisy. So we know clinical prediction is often outperformed by algorithm. There's an old book on this which caused a big stir, and its implications, I think, have yet to be adequately internalized. And it's that human beings are variable in their judgments depending on day, and that's a source of error. And it's that human beings also are subject to particular cognitive biases. Now, there's a fantastic opportunity there. I've stayed away from the word superintelligence. One thing I think we can say about superintelligence, if what is meant is that AI can perform as well as human beings, that's extremely unambitious. So we want them to do better than to, it's very good to be able to know which people should be tested for heart disease. And if they can do better than we can, that's fantastic and the opposite of scary. So there's that. Then there are a set of problems which neither human beings nor prediction problems, neither human beings nor AI can, in principle, ever solve. And the reason isn't mysterious, it's the data's not available. So the romantic attraction one is fun because it's intuitive. And the question is whether we can do better with probability bands. If someone's heterosexual, the likelihood that they're going to fall in love with someone of the same sex is vanishingly small. So that's, that we don't need AI to know that, to tell us that. If someone likes people who are the same age as they are, then someone who's a lot older, a lot younger, it's just not going to work. We don't need AI for that. Can we do much, much better? Unclear. And why exactly? It's a little like the music lab experiment, where there's so much going on the spot that is very hard to discern. And that's a limitation. Now, in a way, that's regrettable because it would be very nice to know, for example, whether there's going to be a revolution. Companies would like to know whether a new movie is going to be a big hit. And within limits, they know some things. But there was a famous statement about the success of movies by someone who was in the business for decades who said, here's the secret, nobody knows anything. Now, that was meant as a declaration of failure, but it's intrinsic maybe to the problem that you don't know enough. Now, of course, there are some things that we know are going to be catastrophes, and some things we know with high probability are going to do pretty well. But the probability band is very wide. So these are things that we know, or categories where we can, start building our practice of law and medicine, et cetera, with these as provisional building blocks.
Thank you, Professor. Connecting to the previous question, you concluded with the thought that the problem is of not having relevant data. But as more of our conduct goes online, there is an argument to make that we will have more and more data going forward. Some of it by consent, some of it not by consent, but that won't really matter because there will be more data. So in that world, would that problem disappear? Is the first. And to give a small example, for example, if our romantic preferences or election results and all, there's enough data to kind of figure out patterns by AI, and their predictions become better than, say, electoral pundits on TV or romantic advisors, then is that a problem in any manner of speaking? That's one element. So more data, is there any issue with that? And second is the trust question. What if the first problem leads to the thing of humans trusting AI data more? In your framework, is there any kind of way to think about the trust question?
Those are great questions. Thank you. Okay, so let's suppose all the data that ever existed is put into something that's in, California. And I'm holding something that isn't a coin, it's a car key, but it has a heads and has a tails. And I flip it. That thing with all the data isn't going to be able to predict the outcome. There's the factors that are relevant to whether it's going to come up. Are you excited to find out how it's going to come up? Would you like me to do it? The factors that are relevant to heads or tails aren't something that all the data in the world will be determinative of. So what would you need to know ex ante to know heads or tails? Things that I think in principle aren't knowable ex ante. What am I about to do with my thumb? How high am I going to throw it? What part of the ground is it going to land? Now, if you ask whether a song is going to do well across a certain universe of songs, if it's a new song by Taylor Swift, of course, it's going to get a big boost. So we know that, and AI might be able to be a lot more precise about that. But if we had all the data in the world, the Music Lab experiment is demonstrative that we wouldn't know what's going to happen. So what I'm aiming to do is to get at least some clarity on what categories of problems are in principle not susceptible to predictive success, even if you have all the data that there is. Now, what we have to be careful about is what does that mean exactly? If it's about whether there's going to be a rebellion in some nation, there's a lot of stuff that would be relevant to the probability. So if you had access to everybody's Instagram posts and everybody's conversation on WhatsApp, then you'd know more about what's actually in people's heads than you otherwise would. So maybe then you could do more with probabilities, but still there are things like who's going to be talking to whom, where, you wouldn't know. Okay, so insofar as these remarks have been very upbeat about AI's predictive power, your question of trust comes to the fore. And we want to know when people don't trust algorithms or AI, exactly why is that? Now, one reason might be a sense that there are factors on the ground that AI can't be aware of. And so I don't trust it because it doesn't know what a person knows. That might be true. So the 10% of judges who outperform algorithms, they're seeing the defendant, they might learn something that the algorithm can't in principle. Maybe you could have an algorithm devised so that it is doing the equivalent of seeing, but we're not there yet. Distrust seems to depend partly on a sense that if an algorithm or AI fails once, people are unforgiving of that, where they are forgiving of human error. So we have a sense, and secret, there might be a chapter in the book on exactly this, of what the categories of algorithm or AI aversion are, and of how to counteract each. Now, if it's justified, we don't want to counteract it. But there's a wide range that is not justified. Pilots are very trusting of the aids they get when they fly the planes because the aids work. And there are things that are happening in your car, if you have one, that are either actually algorithm driven or are the functional equivalent of that. And they're great for drivers and people aren't complaining.
Thank you for the talk. One thing that is really interesting to me is the 10% of the bestest judges who outperform. What do you think then should or will become the relationship of these 10% with algorithms? Do they become managers of these algorithms? Do in each industry, the top experts, is that kind of the future?
Okay, so what we don't know yet is why the 10% outperform the algorithms. And in the doctor data, I don't think we know whether the best 10% of doctors outperform the algorithms. If the 10% outperform the algorithms offhand, it might be because they have access to information which algorithms can't in principle get. And then what you might do is have the algorithm be an aid rather than a decider. And the 10% would, so that's one possibility. Another possibility is that there's something that the algorithm doesn't know, which it could know, if it engaged in some way with the 10%. It might be the 10% know about a variable that is relevant and that could be communicated to the algorithm. So we could get the algorithm up to speed. It's intuitive to think the following, that algorithms should be used as advisors and not as decision makers in multiple domains. And there are cases in which that's clearly right. It might be that there's some unanticipatable thing that a human being might see on the spot where deference to the algorithm would produce catastrophe. It might be about war or something, yes, with very high stakes. But there's evidence when human beings overrule algorithms, they often make things worse. So people's judgment about when to accept and when to reject AI's recommendation is subject to cognitive biases.
Hi, thank you, Professor. How useful do you think the instruments for defeating biases are, for example, in criminal proceedings, as some states have included in jury instructions, kind of instruments to create awareness of biases? Would you say that those instruments can maybe make the gap between the judges and the algorithms a little bit thinner, or what would you think about those instruments of
Okay, great.
awareness?
It's an empirical question, of course. So if you tell judges as a whole are subject to current offense bias or mugshot bias, it should be that the power of the bias is reduced. How much, TBD. For many cognitive biases, awareness of the bias is an imperfect fix. So if you tell people about Daniel Kahneman, who died not long ago, had a clear view on this, which is that cognitive biases are extremely powerful, and it's very hard for people to overcome them. So, but this is an empirical question. The data is suggestive that the algorithms do significantly better than the people, and it kind of eliminates the middleman to say, let's just rely on the algorithm, or at least give the judge the benefit of the algorithm with maybe a justification requirement. If you're not going to go the way the algorithm suggests, you have to explain yourself. That would be better, maybe, than telling people you have cognitive biases.
All right, food for thought. Thanks so much, everyone, for coming. Thanks again to the Dean's Office for sponsoring this. And stay tuned spring semester for some more faculty book talks if all goes according to plan. Thanks.